The name Lucifer appears exactly once in the entire Bible, and in the original Hebrew text, it isn't there. So how did a mistranslated word, lifted from a political insult aimed at a Babylonian king, become the most feared supernatural figure in Western history? The answer involves a Roman astronomy term, a Greek goat god, centuries of borrowed mythology, and a blind English poet who was writing about his own political failures. This is not a religious debate. This is a history of one of the most consequential mistranslations ever made. Let's begin. Before we can talk about Lucifer, we need to talk about what the Bible actually says. The original Hebrew scriptures contain a book called Isaiah, written in the 8th century BCE. Chapter 14 is a taunt, a victory song, Israel celebrating the collapse of the Babylonian Empire that had enslaved them. In verse 12 of that chapter, Isaiah writes a phrase that will be interpreted in ways that would have enormous consequences for the next 2,000 years. The original Hebrew is Helel ben Shachar. It means shining one, son of the dawn. It is a poetic metaphor. Isaiah is comparing the king of Babylon to the brightest star in the sky, and then describing that star crashing down, the way a modern writer might call a fallen politician the golden boy brought to earth. You're not talking about a literal golden boy, you're describing the rise and fall of a powerful man. No supernatural being, no fallen angel, a king. And the people reading Isaiah at the time understood exactly that. But then the translation begins. Around 400 years after Isaiah writes those words, scholars in Alexandria translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, a project called the Septuagint. When they reach Isaiah 14:12, they render Helel ben Shachar as phosphoros, the Greek word for the morning star. Still just a star, still a metaphor. Then, around 400 CE, a scholar named Jerome translates the entire Bible into Latin. This translation, the Vulgate, will become the official Bible of the Western Christian world for over 1,000 years. And when Jerome reaches that passage in Isaiah, he translates phosphoros into the standard Latin term for the same astronomical body, lux fere, light-bearer, Lucifer. In Jerome's time, Lucifer was not a sinister name. It was a common Latin title for the planet Venus as it appeared before sunrise. Roman poets used it casually. It simply meant the star that carries the light before dawn. Jerome almost certainly had no intention of naming the devil. He was doing his job, finding the closest Latin equivalent for a Greek astronomical term. But that single word, Lucifer, would sit in the text for over 1,000 years, waiting to be misread. And misread it would be. While the name Lucifer was sitting quietly in the Latin Bible, something else was happening with the character we now associate with him, Satan. Because here is the second thing most people have never been told. The Satan of the oldest books of the Bible is not a villain. He doesn't rule hell. He doesn't tempt humans. He isn't an enemy of God. In the book of Job, considered by scholars to be among the most ancient texts in the Hebrew Bible, there is a figure called Ha-Satan. Not Satan, Ha-Satan. The Ha is the Hebrew definite article. It means the. And in Hebrew grammar, that makes this not a name, but a title, a job description. Ha-Satan means the accuser, the adversary, the one who brings formal charges. In the book of Job, Ha-Satan operates inside God's divine court. He is a prosecutor. He travels the earth, observes human behavior, and presents cases before God about whether people's faith is genuine. When God asks Ha-Satan where he has been, he answers plainly, roaming through the earth, going back and forth across it. He is an investigator, a celestial auditor. His argument about Job is a legal one. This man only worships you because you protect him and make him wealthy. Remove those protections, and he will curse you to your face. Test the case. This is a theological debate conducted within the system, not a declaration of war against it. Ha-Satan is not fighting God. He is working for God, challenging the court to examine whether human devotion is real or transactional. There is no fall, no rebellion, no army of angels, no kingdom of darkness. This character is so different from the devil we imagine that some scholars argue they shouldn't even share the same name, that calling Job's Ha-Satan Satan in English translation is itself a misleading choice that colors how readers interpret the text. So how did a heavenly prosecutor become the Prince of Darkness? The answer requires understanding the world in which the Bible was written. The ancient Near East was not a world of one God, neatly opposed by one devil. It was a world saturated with competing mythologies, serpent gods, dying and rising deities, light-bringers, underworld kings, all circulating simultaneously, bleeding into each other across borders and centuries. And the people who wrote what became the Bible were living inside that world. Consider Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion that directly influenced Jewish thought during the Babylonian exile, the very period when some of the Hebrew scriptures were being compiled and revised. In Zoroastrian tradition, there is a cosmic force of evil called Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, the great opponent of the good god Ahura Mazda. Some ancient texts describe how Angra Mainyu confronted the prophet Zoroaster in the desert, offering him dominion over all nations if he would abandon his god and worship the adversary instead. Zoroaster refused. Scholars have noted the structural similarity between this account and the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness, where an adversary offers Christ rulership over all the kingdoms of the world. Whether this represents direct borrowing, parallel development, or something in between remains a subject of academic discussion. But the imagery existed in the cultural air long before the Gospels were written. Then there is the figure of Pan. Pan is the ancient Greek god of the wild, depicted with the horns and legs of a goat, connected to nature, desire, and the untamed world beneath civilization. And in northern Israel, near a place called Caesarea Philippi, there was a grotto sacred to Pan, a cave with rushing underground waters that the ancient world believed was the literal entrance to the underworld, the gateway to Hades. In the soil of what would become the Holy Land, Pan was also connected, through overlapping mythological traditions, to Apollo, the god of light, music, and beauty. Apollo's sister Diana bore the title Lucifera, the light-bearer. The same root, the same word. Light-bearer, Lucifer. Again, not as a name of evil, as a title of brilliance, of the star that comes before the sun. And then there is Prometheus, who in Greek myth stole fire from the gods and gave knowledge to humanity, who was punished for eternity for daring to elevate human beings beyond what the divine order intended. A rebel who sought to give humans what the heavens wanted withheld, chained and suffering as punishment. These figures, the serpent who offers knowledge, the light-bringer who falls, the rebel punished for defying heaven, the underworld lord with the face of a goat, were not the invention of any single culture. They were the shared symbolic vocabulary of the ancient world. And the writers of the New Testament were fluent in that vocabulary. Here is where the story becomes almost difficult to believe, except that the documents exist to trace it. In the 1st and 2nd centuries CC, early Christian writers began doing something that seemed reasonable on the surface: connecting the dots. There is a serpent in Genesis who tempts Eve. There is Satan in Job, who challenges God before the divine court. There is the Lucifer line in Isaiah about a being falling from the sky. And there is a statement in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verse 18, where Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." Connect those 4 texts, and a story emerges. A great angel, brilliant as the morning star, falls from heaven, becomes the ancient serpent of Eden, becomes the accuser in the court of God, becomes the enemy of all humanity. The difficulty is that these texts were not originally connected. Isaiah was writing about a Babylonian king. Job's Satan is operating within divine authority, not against it. The serpent in Genesis is never identified as Satan anywhere in the original text. That connection is an interpretation layered onto it later. And the statement in Luke most likely refers to a spiritual reality observed in the moment, not a historical account of a primordial war. But once these interpretations were written down and repeated by theologians of growing authority, they began to solidify. Each generation inherited the interpretation rather than the original. The connections started to feel ancient, because by the time most readers encountered them, they were. By the time the book of Revelation was written, in the 1st century CC, during a period of intense Roman persecution, the author had centuries of accumulated imagery available, and he used it with full deliberate force. The great dragon, the ancient serpent, the one called the devil and Satan, cast down from heaven with his angels. This was cosmic poetry written for a persecuted people, drawing on every available symbol of overwhelming, terrifying power. Egyptian chaos serpents, Zoroastrian evil lords, Greek underworld kings, all fused into a single, ultimate adversary. It was intentional, it was powerful, and it worked. But it was also literary, a fusion of images built across centuries by writers working in different languages, different cultures, different centuries. What was missing was a single coherent narrative. A story with a beginning, a character, a psychology. That would come from a blind man in London in 1667. John Milton had backed the losing side of history. He had written passionate arguments justifying the execution of King Charles I. He had served as a senior official in Oliver Cromwell's revolutionary government. He had spent years defending the English Republic in print, in multiple languages, for an international audience. Then the monarchy returned. And Milton, now in his 50s, now completely blind, now politically toxic and in genuine danger, retreated to his house and began to dictate. What he dictated to his daughters and various assistants was Paradise Lost. Published in 1667, the poem took all of the scattered theological threads, Isaiah's falling star, Revelation's dragon, the serpent of Genesis, the rebel angel of early Christian tradition, and wove them into a single, fully realized character. Lucifer, the greatest of all archangels, brilliant beyond measure, beautiful beyond description, who led a rebellion against God in heaven, was defeated by the archangel Michael, fell into hell, and then, unable to attack God directly, turned his fury toward God's most beloved creation, humanity. Milton's Satan reasons. He suffers. He gives speeches of staggering eloquence. His most famous line, from the depths of hell, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." The Western world had never encountered anything quite like it. Here was the devil given psychology, given a perspective that readers could almost uncomfortably understand. William Blake read Paradise Lost and concluded that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it. Percy Shelley argued that Milton's Satan was morally superior to his God. The Romantics seized the fallen angel as the ultimate symbol of rebellion against tyranny. It is worth pausing on that word, tyranny. Milton was a man who had watched a republic fall and a king return to power. He had seen the execution of a tyrant followed by the return of another. He had written about freedom and been imprisoned for it. When he sat down to write his devil, this proud, brilliant being who refused to submit, who chose hell over servitude, who said better to rule in darkness than bow in light, he was not simply writing theology. He was writing from somewhere personal. And that is exactly why it landed the way it did. Milton did not invent these ideas from nothing. Every thread he used had existed before. But he assembled them. The mistranslated verse, the prosecuting angel, the pagan light-bringers, the Greek underworld kings, the Zoroastrian adversary, into a character so fully realized that he effectively replaced whatever the previous imagination had been. After Paradise Lost, readers of Genesis encounter the serpent and see Milton's Satan behind it, whether they know it or not. He had retroactively given the entire tradition a face. The Lucifer we picture today, winged, beautiful, tragic, defiant, is not from the Bible. He is from a poem, written by a blind revolutionary in a house in London, dictated to his daughters, while the political world he had believed in collapsed around him. So what are we left with? A Hebrew metaphor for a Babylonian king, translated into Greek as a morning star, then into Latin as the light-bearer, misread as a proper name, connected to unrelated texts by early Christian writers trying to make sense of the universe, merged with Zoroastrian adversaries, Greek underworld gods, pagan light-bringers, and goat-horned nature deities, and finally given flesh, voice, and tragedy by a blind English poet whose politics and whose God had both seemingly failed him. That is Lucifer. Not a single revelation handed down complete, but a construction, assembled across 2,000 years by people working in different languages, different centuries, different crises. And there is something worth sitting with in that, because the Lucifer of Paradise Lost carries the weight of the English Civil War. The Satan of Revelation carries the terror of Roman persecution. The Hasatan of Job carries the philosophical anxiety of a culture asking why righteous people suffer. The Hillel ben Shachar of Isaiah carries the relief and rage of people finally free from Babylonian slavery. Every age built its adversary out of what it needed.
Which raises a question that is harder than it sounds. When you picture the devil, that winged, beautiful, terrible figure, are you seeing something ancient and unrevealed? Or are you seeing the accumulated fears, politics, and artistic choices of 2,000 years of human storytelling? That question doesn't resolve easily, but it might be the most important question you can ask about any idea you have been handed.